With the breakdown of the medieval system, the gods of chaos, lunacy, and bad taste gained ascendancy. Ignatius was writing in one of his big chief tablets. After a period in which the Western world had enjoyed order, tranquility, unity, and oneness with its true God and Trinity, there appeared winds of change which spelled evil days ahead. An ill wind blows no one good. The luminous years of Abelard, Thomas à Becket, and Everyman dimmed into dross. Fortuna's wheel had turned on humanity, crushing its collarbone, smashing its skull, twisting its torso, puncturing its pelvis, sorrowing its soul. Having once been so high, humanity fell so low. What had once been dedicated to the soul was now dedicated to the sail. That is rather fine, Ignatius said to himself, and continued his hurried writing. Merchants and charlatans gained control of Europe, calling their insidious gospel the Enlightenment. The day of the locust was at hand, but from the ashes of humanity there arose no phoenix. The humble and pious peasant, Piers Plowman, went to town to sell his children to the lords of the new order for purposes that we may call questionable at best. I mailed this singular monograph to the library as a gift. However, I am not really certain that it was ever accepted. It may well have been thrown out because it was only written in pencil on tablet paper. The gyre had widened. The great chain of being had snapped like so many paper clips strung together by some drooling idiot. Death, destruction, anarchy, progress, ambition, and self-improvement were to be Piers's new fate, and a vicious fate it was to be. Now he was faced with the perversion of having to go to work. His vision of history temporarily fading, Ignatius sketched a noose at the bottom of the page. Then he drew a revolver in a little box on which he neatly printed gas chamber. He scratched the side of the pencil back and forth across the paper and labeled this Apocalypse. When he had finished decorating the page, he threw the tablet to the floor among the many others that were scattered about. This had been a very productive morning, he thought. He had not accomplished so much in weeks. Looking at the dozens of big chief tablets that made a rug of Indian headdresses around the bed, Ignatius thought smugly that on their yellowed pages and wide-ruled lines were the seeds of a magnificent study in comparative history. Very disordered, of course, but one day he would assume the task of editing these fragments of his mentality into a jigsaw puzzle of a very grand design. The completed puzzle would show literate men the disaster course that history had been taking for the past 4 centuries. In the 5 years that he had dedicated to this work, he had produced an average of only 6 paragraphs monthly. He could not even remember what he had written in some of the tablets, and he realized that several were filled principally with doodling. However, Ignatius thought calmly, Rome was not built in a day. Ignatius pulled his flannel nightshirt up and looked at his bloated stomach. He often bloated while lying in bed in the morning, contemplating the unfortunate turn that events had taken since the Reformation. Doris Day and Greyhound scenic cruisers, whenever they came to mind, created an even more rapid expansion of his central region. But since the attempted arrest and the accident, he had been bloating for almost no reason at all. His pyloric valves snapping shut indiscriminately and filling his stomach with trapped gas which had character and being and resented its confinement. He wondered whether his pyloric valve might be trying, Cassandra-like, to tell him something. As a medievalist, Ignatius believed in the Rota Fortuna, or Wheel of Fortune, a central concept in De Consolatione Philosophiae, the philosophical work which had laid the foundation for medieval thought. Boethius, the late Roman, who had written the Consolatione while unjustly imprisoned by the emperor, had said that a blind goddess spins us on a wheel, that our luck comes in cycles. Was the ludicrous attempt to arrest him the beginning of a bad cycle? Was his wheel rapidly spinning downward? The accident was also a bad sign. Ignatius was worried. For all his philosophy, Boethius had been tortured and killed. Then Ignatius's valve closed again, and he rolled over on his left side to press the valve open. Oh, Fortuna, blind, heedless goddess, I am strapped to your wheel. Ignatius belched. Do not crush me beneath your spokes. Raise me on high, divinity. What are you mumbling about in there, boy? His mother asked through the closed door. I am praying, Ignatius answered angrily. Patrolman Mancuso's coming today to see me about the accident. You better say a little Hail Mary for me, honey. Oh my God, Ignatius muttered. I think it's wonderful you praying, babe. I've been wondering what you do locked up in there all the time. Please go away, Ignatius screamed. You're shattering my religious ecstasy. Bounding up and down on his side vigorously, Ignatius sensed the belch rising in his throat, but when he expectantly opened his mouth, he emitted only a small burp. Still, the bouncing had some physiological effect. Ignatius touched the small erection that was pointing downward into the sheet, held it, and lay still, trying to decide what to do. In this in this position, with the red flannel nightshirt around his chest and his massive stomach sagging into the mattress, he thought somewhat sadly that after 18 years with his hobby, it had become merely mechanical physical act stripped of the flights of fancy and invention that he had once been able to bring to it. At one time, he had almost developed it into an art form, practicing the hobby with the skill and fervor of an artist and philosopher, a scholar and a gentleman. There were still hidden in his room several accessories which he had once used: a rubber glove, a piece of fabric from a silk umbrella, a jar of Noxema. Putting them away again after it was all over had eventually grown too depressing. Ignatius manipulated and concentrated. At last a vision appeared. The familiar figure of the large and devoted collie that had been his pet when he was in high school. Woof, Ignatius almost heard Rex say once again. Woof, woof, arf. Rex looked so lifelike. One ear drooped. He panted. The apparition jumped over a fence and chased a stick that somehow landed in the middle of Ignatius's quilt. As the tan and white fur grew closer, Ignatius's eyes dilated, crossed, and closed, and he lay wanly back among his 4 pillows, hoping that he had some Kleenex in his room. I come about that porter job you got advertised in the paper? Yeah? Lana Lee looked at the sunglasses. You got any references? Police, give me a reference. You tell me I better get my ass gainfully employed, Jones said, and shot a jet of smoke out into the empty bar. Sorry, no police characters, not in a business like this. I got an investment to watch. I ain't exactly a character yet, but I can tell they're gonna start. No vagrant visible means of support stuff on me. They told me. Jones withdrew into a forming cloud. I thought maybe the Knight of Joy liked to help somebody become a member of the community, help a poor colored boy in a jail. I keep the picket off, give the Knight of Joy a good civil right rat. Cut the crap. Hey, you got any experience as a porter? What, sweeping and mopping and all that stuff? Watch your mouth. I got a clean business. Hey, anybody do that, especially colored people. I've been looking, Lana Lee said, becoming a grave personnel manager, for the right boy for this job for several days. She put her hands in the pockets of her leather overcoat and looked into the sunglasses. This was really a deal, like a present left on her doorstep. A guy who would get arrested for vagrancy if he didn't work. She would have a captive porter whom she could work for almost nothing. It was beautiful. Lana felt good for the first time since she had come upon these 2 characters messing up her bar. The pay is $20 a week. Hey, no wonder the right man ain't show up. Say whatever happened to the minimum wage. You need a job, right? I need a porter. Business stinks. Take it from there. The last person to work in here must have starved to death. You work 6 days a week from 10 to 3. If you come in regular, who knows, you might get a little raise. Don't worry, I'll come in regular. Anything can keep my ass away from the police for a few hours. Where you keep those brooms? One thing we gotta understand is keeping our mouth clean around here. Yes, ma'am. I sure don't want to make a bad impression in a fine place like the Knight of Joy. The door opened and Darlene came in wearing a satin cocktail dress and a flowered hat, flouncing her skirt gracefully as she walked. How come you're so late? Lana screamed at her. I told you to be here at 1 today. My cockatoo came down with a cold last night. Lana, it was awful. The whole night he was up coughing right in my ear. What do you think of excuses like that? Well, it's true, Darlene answered in an injured voice. She put her huge hat on the bar and climbed on a stool up into a cloud that Jones had blown. I had to take him to the vet this morning to get a vitamin shot. I don't want that poor bird coughing all over my furniture. What got into your head that made you encourage those 2 characters last night? Every day, Darlene, I try to explain to you the kind of clientele we want in here. Then I walk in and find you eating crap off my bar with some old lady and a fat turd. You trying to close down my business? People look in the door, they see a combination like that, they walk off to another bar. What do I have to do to make you understand, Darlene? How does a human being get through to a mind like yours? I already told you I felt sorry for that poor woman, Lana. You ought to seen how her son treated her. You ought to heard the story he told me about a Greyhound bus. And all that time, that sweet old lady sitting there paying for his drinks, I had to take one of her cakes to make her feel good. But the next time I find you encouraging people like that and ruining my investment, I'm going to kick you out on your behind. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. You sure you got what I said? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Now, show this boy where we keep our brooms and crap and get that ball that old lady broke cleaned up. You're in charge of getting this whole goddamn place as clean as a pin for what you did to me last night. I'm going shopping. Then I got to the door and turned around. I don't want nobody fooling with that cabinet under the bar. I swear, Darlene said to Jones after Lana had swung through the door, this place is worse than the army. She just hired you today? Yeah, Jones answered. She ain't exactly hiring me, she kind of buying me off the auction block. At least you're going to get a salary. I only work on commission for how much I get people to drink. You think that's easy? Try to get some guy to buy more than one of the kinds of drinks they serve in here. All water. They got to spend $10, $15 to get any effect at all. I swear, it's a tough job. Man even pumps water in the champagne. You ought to taste that. And then she's all the time complaining about how business stinks. You ought to buy a drink at this bar and find out. Even when she's only got about 5 people drinking in here, she's making a fortune. Water don't cost nothing. What'd she go shopping for? A whip? Don't ask me. Lana never tells me nothing. That Lana's a funny one. Darlene blew her nose daintily. What I really want is to be an exotic. I've been practicing in my apartment on a routine. If I can get Lana to let me dance in here at night, I can get me a regular salary and quit hustling on commission. Now that I think of it, I ought to get me some commission for what them people drank up in here last night. That old lady sure drank up a lot of beer. I don't see what Lana's got to complain about. Business is business. That fat man and his mama wasn't much worse than the plenty we get in here. I think the thing that got Lana was that funny green cap he had stuck up on his head. When he was talking, he'd pull the ear flap down, and when he was listening, he'd stick it up again. By the time Lana got here, everybody was hollering at him, so he had both flaps stuck out like wings, you know. It looked kind of funny. And you say this fat cat's traveling around with his mama? Jones asked, making a mental association. Uh-huh, Darlene folded her handkerchief and slipped it into her bosom. I sure hope they don't ever decide to hang around here again. I'll really be in trouble. Jesus, Darlene sounded worried. Look, we've got to do something about this place before Lana comes back. But listen, don't knock yourself out cleaning up this dump. I've never really seen it clean since I've been here. And it's so dark in here all the time, nobody can tell the difference. To hear Lana talk, you'd think this hole was the Ritz. Jones shut out a fresh cloud. Through his glasses, he could hardly see anything at all. Patrolman Mancuso enjoyed riding the motorcycle up and down St. Charles Avenue. At the precinct, he had borrowed a large and loud one that was all chromium and baby blue, and at the touch of a switch it would become a pinball machine, flashing, blinking red and white lights. The siren, a cacophony of 12 crazed bobcats, was enough to make suspicious characters within half a mile radius defecate in panic and rush for cover. Patrolman Mancuso's love for the motorcycle was platonically intense. The forces of evil generated by the hideous and apparently impossible to uncover underground of suspicious characters seemed remote to him this afternoon, though. The ancient hoax of St. Charles Avenue arched over the avenue like a canopy shielding him from the mild winter sun that splashed and sparkled on the chrome of the motorcycle. Although the days had lately been cold and damp, the afternoon that had sudden surprising warmth that makes New Orleans winters gentle. Patrolman Mancuso appreciated the mildness, for he was wearing only a t-shirt and Bermuda shorts, the sergeant's costume selection for the day. The long red beard that hooked over his ears by means of wires did manage to warm his chest a little. He had snatched the beard from the locker while the sergeant wasn't looking. Patrolman Mancuso inhaled the moldy scent of the oaks and thought in a romantic aside that St. Charles Avenue must be the loveliest place in the world. From time to time he passed the slowly rocking streetcars that seemed to be leisurely moving toward no special destination, following their route through the old mansions on either side of the avenue. Everything looked so calm, so prosperous, so unsuspicious. On his own time, he was going up to see that poor widow Riley. She had looked so pitiful crying in the middle of that wreck. The least he could do was to try and help her. At Constantinople Street, he turned toward the river, sputtering and growling through a declining neighborhood until he reached a block of houses built in the 1880s and 90s, wooden Gothic and Gilded Age relics that dripped carving and scroll work. Boss tweed suburban stereotypes separated by alleys so narrow that a yardstick could almost bridge them, and fenced in by iron pikes and low walls of crumbling brick. The larger houses had become impromptu apartment buildings, their porches converted into additional rooms. In some of the front yards, there were aluminum carports, and bright aluminum awnings had been installed on one or two of the buildings. It was a neighborhood that had degenerated from Victorian to nothing in particular, a block that had moved into the 20th century carelessly and uncaringly, and with very limited funds. The address that Patrolman Mancuso was looking for was the tiniest structure on the block. Aside from the carports, a Lilliput of the 80s. A frozen banana tree, brown and stricken, languished against the front of the porch, the tree preparing to collapse as the iron fence had done long ago. Near the dead tree, there was a slight mound of earth and a leaning Celtic cross cut from plywood. The 1946 Plymouth was parked in the front yard, its bumper pressed against the porch, its taillights blocking the brick sidewalk. But, except for the Plymouth and the weathered cross and the mummified banana tree, the tiny yard was completely bare. There were no shrubs, there was no grass, and no birds sang. Patrolman Mancuso looked at the Plymouth and saw the deep crease in its roof and the fender, filled with concave circles, that was separated from the body by 3 or 4 inches of space. Van Camp's Pork and Beans was printed on the piece of cardboard taped across the hole that had been the rear window. Stopping by the grave, he read Rex in faded letters on the cross. Then he climbed the worn brick steps and heard through the closed shutters a booming chant, "Big girls don't cry." While he was waiting for someone to answer the bell, he read the faded sticker on the crystal of the door. "A slip of the lip can sink a ship." Below, a wave held a finger to lips that had turned tan. Along the block, some people were out on their porches looking at him in the motorcycle. The shutters across the street that slowly flipped up and down to get the proper focus indicated that he had also considerable unseen audience, for a police motorcycle in the block was an event, especially if its driver wore shorts and a red beard. The block was poor, certainly, but honest. Suddenly self-conscious, Mancuso rang the bell again and assumed what he considered his erect official posture. He gave his audience his Mediterranean profile, but the audience saw only a small and sallow figure whose shorts hung clumsily in the crotch, whose spindly legs looked too naked in comparison to the formal garters and nylon socks that hung near the ankles. The audience remained curious but unimpressed. A few were not even especially curious. The few who had expected some vision to visit that miniature house eventually. Mancuso knocked savagely at the shutters. "They home!" a woman screamed through the shutters of the house next door, an architect's vision of a Jay Gould domestic. "Miss Riley's probably in the kitchen. Go around the back. What are you, mister, a cop?" "Patrolman Mancuso, under cover," he answered sternly. "Yeah?" There was a moment of silence. "Which one do you want, the boy or the mother?" "The mother." "Well, that's good. You'd never get a hold of him. He's watching TV. You hear that? It's driving me nuts. My nerves are shot." Patrolman Mancuso thanked the woman's voice and walked into the dank alley. In the backyard, he found Mrs. Riley hanging a spotted and yellowed sheet on a line that ran through the bare fig trees. "Oh, it's you," she said after a moment. She had almost started to scream when she saw the man with the red beard appear in her yard. "How you doing, Mr. Mancuso? What them people said?" She stepped cautiously over the broken brick paving in her brown felt moccasins. "Come on in the house and we'll have us a nice cup of coffee." The kitchen was a large, high-ceilinged room, the largest in the house, and it smelled of coffee and old newspapers. Like every room in the house, it was dark. The greasy wallpaper and brown wooden moldings would have transformed any light into gloom, and from the alley very little light filtered in anyway. Although the interiors of homes did not interest Patrolman Mancuso, he still did notice, as anyone would have, the antique stove with the high oven and the refrigerator with the cylindrical motor on top. Thinking of the electric fryers, gas dryers, mechanical mixers and beaters, waffle plates and motorized rotisseries that seemed to be always whirring, grinding, beating, cooling, hissing and broiling in the lunar kitchen of his wife Rita, he wondered what Mrs. Riley did in this sparse room. Whenever a new appliance was advertised on television, Mrs. Mancuso bought it no matter how obscure its uses were. "Now, tell me what the man said," Mrs. Riley said, as she began boiling a pot of milk on her Edwardian gas stove. "How much I gotta pay? You told him I was poor widow with a child to support, huh?" "Yeah, I told him that," Mancuso said, sitting erectly in his chair and looking hopefully at the kitchen table covered with oilcloth. "Do you mind if I put my beard on the table? It's kind of hot in here and it's sticking to my face." "Sure, go ahead, babe. Here, have a nice jelly donut. I just bought them fresh this morning over by Magazine Street. Ignatius says to me this morning, 'Mama, I sure feel like a jelly donut.' You know, so I went over to the German and I bought him 2 dozen. Look, they got a few left." She offered Patrolman Mancuso a torn and oily cake box that looked as if it had been subjected to unusual abuse during someone's attempt to take all of the donuts at once. At the bottom of the box, Mancuso found 2 withered pieces of donut, out of which, judging by their moist edges, the jelly had been sucked. Thank you, anyway, Mrs. Riley. I had me a big lunch." "Oh, ain't that a shame?" She filled 2 cups, half full, with thick cold coffee and poured the boiling milk in up to the rim. "Ignatius loves his donuts. He says to me, 'Mom, I love my donuts.'" Mrs. Riley slurped a bit at the rim of her cup. "He's out in the parlor right now watching the TV. Every afternoon, as right as rain, he looks at that show where them kids dance." In the kitchen, the music was somewhat fainter than it had been on the porch. Mancuso pictured the green hunting cap bathed in the blue glow of the television screen. "He don't like the show at all, but he won't miss it. You ought to hear what he says about them poor kids." "I spoke with the man this morning," Mancuso said, hoping that Mrs. Riley had exhausted the subject of her son. "Yeah?" She put 3 spoons of sugar in her coffee, and holding the spoon with the cup in her thumb so that the handle threatened to puncture her eyeball, she slurped a bit more. "What he said, honey?" "I told him I investigated the accident and that you just skidded on a wet street." "That sounds good, so what did he say then, babe?" "He said he don't want to go to court, he wants a settlement now." "Oh my God," Ignatius bellowed from the front of the home. "What an egregious insult to good taste." "Don't pay him no mind," Mrs. Riley advised the startled policeman. "He does that all the time. He looks at the TV. A settlement. That means he wants some money. He even got a contractor to appraise the damage. Here, this is the estimate." Mrs. Riley took the sheet of paper and read the typed column of itemized figures beneath the contractor's letterhead. "Lord, $1,020? This is terrible. How am I going to pay that?" She dropped the estimate on the oilcloth. "You sure this is right?" "Yes, ma'am. He's got a lawyer working on it, too. It's all on the up and up." "Where am I going to get $1,000, though? All me and Ignatius got is my poor husband's Social Security and a little bit of 2-bit pension, and that don't come to much." "Do I believe the total perversion that I am witnessing?" Ignatius screamed from the parlor. The music had a frantic tribal rhythm. A chorus of falsettos sang insinuatingly about loving all night long. "I'm sorry," Mancuso said, almost heartbroken over Mrs. Riley's financial quandary. "Oh, it's not your fault, darling. Maybe I can get a mortgage on the house. We can't do nothing about it, huh?" "No, ma'am," Mancuso answered, listening to some sort of approaching stampede. "The children on that program should all be gassed," Ignatius said as he strode into the kitchen in his nightshirt. Then he noticed the guest and said coldly, "Oh, Ignatius, you know Mr. Mancuso. Say hello." "I do believe that I have seen him about," Ignatius said, and looked out the back door. Mancuso was too startled by the monstrous flannel nightshirt to reply to Ignatius's pleasantry. "Ignatius, honey, the man wants over $1,000 for what I did to his building." $1,000? He will not get a cent. We shall have him prosecuted immediately. Contact our attorneys, mother." "Our attorneys? He's got an estimate from a contractor. Mr. Mancuso here says there's nothing I can do." "Oh, well, you shall have to pay him then." "I could take it to court if you think it's best." "Drunken driving," Ignatius said calmly. "You haven't a chance." Mrs. Riley looked depressed. But Ignatius, $1,020. I am certain that you can procure some funds, he told her. Is there any more coffee, or have you given the last to this carnival masker? We can mortgage the home. Oh, of course we won't. What else are we going to do, Ignatius? There are means, Ignatius said absently. I wish you wouldn't bother me with this. That program always increases my anxiety anyway. He smelled the milk before putting it in the pot. I would suggest that you telephone that dairy immediately. This milk is quite aged. I can get $1,000 over by the homestead, Mrs. Riley told the silent patrolman quietly. The house is good security. I had me a real estate agent offer me $7,000 last year. The ironic thing about that program, Ignatius was saying over the stove, keeping one eye peeled so that he could seize the pot as soon as the milk began to boil, is that it is supposed to be an exemplum to the youth of our nation. I would very much like to know what the founding fathers would say if they could see these children being debauched to further the cause of Clearasil. However, I always suspected that democracy would come to this. He painstakingly poured the milk into a Shirley Temple mug. A firm rule must be imposed upon our nation before it destroys itself. The United States needs some theology and geometry, some taste and decency. I suspect that we are teetering on the edge of the abyss. Ignatius, I'm going to have to go by the homestead tomorrow. We shall not deal with those usurers, Mother. Ignatius was feeling around in the cookie jar. Something will turn up. Ignatius, honey, they could put me in jail. Ho hum, if you're going to stage one of your hysterical scenes, I shall have to return to the living room. As a matter of fact, I think I will. He billowed again in the direction of the music, the shower shoes flapping loudly against the soles of his huge feet. What am I going to do with a boy like that? Mrs. Riley sadly asked the patrolman. He don't care about his poor dear mother. Sometimes I think Ignatius wouldn't mind if they did throw me in jail. He's got a heart of ice, that boy. You spoiled him, Mancuso said. A woman's got to watch she don't spoil her kids. How many children you got, Mancuso? 3. Rosalie, Antoinette, and Angelo Jr. Aw, ain't that nice? I bet they sweet, huh? Not like Ignatius. Mrs. Riley shook her head. Ignatius was such a precious child. I don't know what made him change. He used to say to me, Mama, I love you. You don't say that no more. Ah, don't cry, Mancuso said, deeply moved. I'll make you some more coffee. You don't care that if they lock me up? Mrs. Riley sniffled. She opened the oven and took out a bottle of muscatel. Do you want some nice wine, Mr. Mancuso? No, thanks. Being on the force, I gotta make an impression. I always gotta be on the lookout for people, too. You don't mind? Mrs. Riley asked rhetorically and took a long drink from the bottle. Mancuso began boiling the milk, hovering over the stove in a very domestic manner. Sometimes I sure get the blues. Life's hard. I worked hard, too. I've been good. You ought to look on the bright side, Mancuso said. I guess so. Some people got it harder than me, I guess, like my poor cousin, a wonderful woman, went to Mass every day of her life. She got knocked down by a street car over on Magazine Street early one morning while she was out on her way to Fisherman's Mass. It was still dark out. Personally, I never let myself get low, Mancuso lied. You gotta look up. You know what I mean? I got a dangerous line of work. You could get yourself killed. Sometimes I don't apprehend nobody all day. Sometimes I apprehend the wrong person. Like that old man in front of D.H. Holmes. That's my fault, Mr. Mancuso. I should have guessed Ignatius was wrong all along. It's just like him. All the time. I'm telling him, Ignatius, here, put on this nice shirt, put on this nice sweater I bought you, but he doesn't listen. Not that boy. He's got a head like a rock. Then sometimes I get problems at home. With 3 kids, my wife's very nervous. Nerves is a terrible thing. Poor Miss Annie. The next door lady, she's got nerves. Always screaming about Ignatius making noise. That's my wife. Sometimes I gotta get out of the house. If I was another kind of man, sometimes I could really go get myself good and drunk, just between us. I gotta have a little drink. It relieves the pressure, you know. What I do is I go bowl. Mrs. Riley tried to imagine little Mancuso with a big bowling ball and said, You like that, huh? Bowling's wonderful, Mrs. Riley. It takes your mind off things. Oh, my heavens! A voice shouted from the parlor. These girls are doubtless prostitutes already. How can they present horrors like this to the public? I wish I had me a hobby like that. You ought to try bowling. Yeah, I already got arthritis in my elbow. I'm too old to play around with them balls. I'd wrench my back. I got an aunt, 65, a grandma, and she goes bowling all the time. She's even on a team. Some women are like that. Me, I was never much for sports. Bowling's more than a sport. You meet plenty of people over by the alley, nice people. You could make some friends. Yeah, but it's just my luck to drop one of them balls on my toe. I got bum feet already. Next time I go by the alley, I'll let you know. I'll bring my aunt, you and me and my aunt. We'll go down by the alley, okay? Mother, when was this coffee dripped? Ignatius demanded, flapping into the kitchen again. Just about an hour ago. Why? It certainly tastes brackish. I thought it was very good, Patrolman Mancuso said. Just as good as they serve at the French market. I'm making some more now. Do you want a cup? Pardon me, Ignatius said. Mother, are you going to entertain this gentleman all afternoon? I would like to remind you that I am going to the movies tonight and that I am due at the theater promptly at 7 so that I can see the cartoon. I would suggest that you begin preparing something to eat. I'd better go, Mancuso said. Ignatius, you ought to be ashamed, Mrs. Riley said in an angry voice. Me and Mr. Mancuso here just having some coffee. You've been nasty all afternoon. You don't care where I raise that money. You don't care if they lock me up. You don't care about nothing. Am I going to be attacked in my own home before a stranger with a false beard? My heart's broke. Oh, really? Ignatius turned on Mancuso. Will you kindly leave? You are inciting my mother. Mr. Mancuso's not doing nothing but being nice. I'd better go, the patrolman said apologetically. I'll get that money, Mrs. Riley screamed. I'll sell this house. I'll sell it out from under you, boy. I'll go stay by an old folks' home. She grabbed an end of the oilcloth and wiped her eyes. If you do not leave, Ignatius said to Mancuso, who was hooking on his beard, I shall call the police. He is the police, stupid. This is totally absurd, Ignatius said and flapped away. I'm going to my room. He slammed the door and snatched the big chief tablet. Throwing himself back among the pillows on the bed, he began doodling on a yellowed page. After almost 30 minutes of pulling at his hair and chewing on the pencil, he began to compose a paragraph. Were Hroswitha with us today, we would all look to her for counsel and guidance. From the austerity and tranquility of her medieval world, the penetrating gaze of this legendary sibyl of a holy man would exorcise the horrors which materialize before our eyes in the name of television. If we could only juxtapose one eyeball of this sanctified woman and a television tube, both being roughly of the same shape and design, what a phantasmagoria of exploding electrodes would occur. The images of those lasciviously gyrating children would disintegrate into so many ions and molecules, thereby affecting the catharsis which the tragedy of the debauching of the innocent necessarily demands. Mrs. Riley stood in the hall looking at the Do Not Disturb sign printed on a sheet of big chief paper and stuck to the door by an old flesh-colored band-aid. Ignatius, you let me in there, boy, she screamed. Let you in here, he said through the door. Of course I won't. I am occupied at the moment with an especially succinct passage. You let me in. You know that you are never allowed in here. Mrs. Riley pounded on the door. I don't know what is happening to you, Mother, but I suspect that you are momentarily deranged. Now that I think of it, I am too frightened to open the door. You may have a knife or a broken wine bottle. Open up this door, Ignatius. Oh, my valve, it's closing, he groaned loudly. Are you satisfied now that you've ruined me for the rest of the evening? Mrs. Riley threw herself against the unpainted wood. Well, don't break the door. Oh, sorry. Well, don't break the door, he said finally, and after a few moments, the bolt slid open. Ignatius, what's all this trash on the floor? That is my world view that you see. It still must be incorporated into a whole, so be careful where you step. And all the shutters are closed, Ignatius. It's still light outside. My being is not without its Proustian elements, Ignatius said from the bed to which he had quickly returned. Oh, my stomach. It smells terrible in here. Well, what do you expect? The human body, when confined, produces certain odors which we tend to forget in this age of deodorants and other perversions. Actually, I find the atmosphere of this room rather comforting. Schiller needed the scent of apples rotting in his desk in order to write. I, too, have my needs. You may remember that Mark Twain preferred to lie supinely in bed while composing those rather dated and boring efforts which contemporary scholars try to prove meaningful. Veneration of Mark Twain is one of the roots of our current intellectual stalemate. If I know it was like this, I'd have been here a long time ago. I do not know why you're in here now, as a matter of fact, or why you have this sudden compulsion to invade my sanctuary. I doubt whether it will ever be the same after the trauma of this intrusion by an alien spirit. I came to talk to you, boy. Get your face out of them pillows. This must be the influence of that ludicrous representative of the law. He seems to have turned you against your own child. By the way, he has left, hasn't he? Yes, and I apologize to him over the way you acted. Mother, you are standing on my tablets. Will you please move a little? Isn't it enough that you've destroyed my digestion without destroying the fruits of my brain also? Well, where am I going to stand, Ignatius? You want me to get in bed with you? Mrs. Riley asked angrily. Watch out, where you're stepping, please. My God, never has anyone been so totally and literally stormed and besieged. What is it anyway that has driven you in here in this state of complete mania? Could it be the stench of cheap muscatel that is assaulting my nostrils? I made up my mind. You're going to go out and get you a job. Oh, what low joke was Fortuna playing on him now? Arrest, accident, job. Where would this dreadful cycle ever end? I see, Ignatius said calmly. Knowing that you were congenitally incapable of arriving at a decision of this importance, I imagine that that mongoloid law officer put this idea into your head. Me and Mr. Mancuso talk like I used to talk to your papa. Your papa used to tell me what to do. I wish he was alive today. Mancuso and my father are alike only in that they both gave the impression of being rather inconsequential humans. However, your current mentor is apparently the type of person who thinks that everything will be all right if everyone works continually. Mr. Mancuso works hard. He's got a hard road at the precinct. I am certain that he reports several unwanted children who all hope to grow up to be policemen, the girls included. He's got 3 sweet children. I can imagine. Oh, what are you doing? Are you fooling with that valve again? Nobody else got him a valve but you. I ain't got no valve. Everyone has a valve, Ignatius screamed. Mine is simply more developed. I'm trying to open up a passage, which you have succeeded in blocking. It may be permanently closed now, for all I know. Mr. Mancuso says if you work, you can help me pay off the loan. He says he thinks the man might take money in installments. Your friend the patrolman says a great deal. You certainly bring people out, as they say. I never suspected that he could be so loquacious or that he was capable of such perceptive comment. Do you realize that he is trying to destroy our home? It began the moment that he attempted the brutal arrest in front of D.H. Holmes, although you are too limited to comprehend it at all, Mother. This man is our nemesis. He's spun our wheel downward. Wheel? Mr. Mancuso's a good man. You ought to be glad he didn't take you in. In my private apocalypse, he will be impaled upon his own nightstick. Anyway, it is inconceivable that I should get a job. I am very busy with my work at the moment, and I feel that I am entering a very fecund stage. Perhaps the accident jarred and loosened my thought. At any rate, I accomplished a great deal today. We gotta pay that man, Ignatius. You want to see me in jail? Wouldn't you be ashamed with your poor mama behind bars? Will you stop talking about imprisonment? You seem to be preoccupied with the thought. Actually, you seem to be enjoying thinking about it. Martyrdom is meaningless in our age, he belched quietly. I would suggest certain economies around the house. Somehow, you will soon see that you have the required amount. I spend all the money on food for you and whatnots. I have found several empty wine bottles about lately, the contents of which I certainly did not consume. Ignatius! I made the mistake of heating the oven the other day before inspecting it properly. When I opened it to put in my frozen pizza, I was almost blinded. by a bottle of boiled wine that was preparing to explode. I suggest that you divert some of the monies that you are pouring into the liquor industry. For shame, Ignatius, a few bottles of Gallo Muscatel, and with you all them trinkets. Would you please define the meaning of trinkets? Ignatius snapped. All them books, that gramophone, that trumpet I bought you last month. I consider the trumpet a good investment, although your neighbor, Miss Annie, does not. If she beats on my shutters again, I'll pour water on her. Tomorrow we're looking up all the want ads in the paper. You're going to dress up and you're going to go find you a job. I am afraid to ask what your idea of dressing up is. I will probably be turned into an utter mockery. I'm going to iron you a nice white shirt, and you're going to put on one of your papa's nice ties. Do I believe what I'm hearing? Ignatius asked his pillow. It's either that, Ignatius, or I got to take out a mortgage. You want to lose the roof over your head? No, you will not mortgage this house. The whole sense of security with which I have been trying to develop would crumble. I will not have any disinterested party controlling my domicile. I couldn't stand it. Just the thought of it makes my hands break out. He extended a paw so that his mother could examine the rash. That is out of the question, he continued. It would bring all of my latent anxieties to a head, and the result, I fear, would be very ugly indeed. I would not want you to have to spend the remainder of your life caring for a lunatic locked away somewhere in the attic. We shall not mortgage the house. You must have some funds somewhere. I got 150 in the Hibernia Bank. My God, is that all? I hardly thought we were existing so precariously. However, it is fortunate that you have kept this from me. Had I known how close we were to total penury, my nerves would have given out a long time ago. He scratched his paws. I must admit, though, that the alternative for me is rather grim. I doubt very seriously whether anyone will hire me. What do you mean, babe? You're a fine boy with a good education. Employers sense in me a denial of their values. He rolled over onto his back. They fear me. I suspect that they can see that I am forced to function in a century which I loathe. That was true even when I worked for the New Orleans Public Library. But Ignatius, that was the only time you worked since you got out of college, and you was only there for 2 weeks. That is exactly what I mean, Ignatius replied, aiming a paper ball at the bowl of the glass chandelier. All you did was paste them little slips in the books. Yes, but I had my own aesthetic about pasting those slips. On some days I could only paste in 3 or 4 slips and at the same time feel satisfied with the quality of my work. The library authorities resented my integrity about the whole thing. They only wanted another animal who could slop glue on their bestsellers. You think maybe you could get a job there again? I seriously doubt it. At the time, I said some rather upsetting things to the woman in charge of the processing department. They even revoked my borrower's card. You must realize the fear and hatred with which my Weltanschauung instills in people, Ignatius belched. I won't mention that misguided trip to Baton Rouge. That incident, I believe, caused me to form a mental block against working. It was nice to you at college, Ignatius. Now tell the truth. They let you hang around there a long time. They even let you teach a class. It was basically the same. Same poor white from Mississippi told the dean that I was a propagandist for the Pope, which was patently untrue. I do not support the current Pope. He does not at all fit my concept of a good authoritarian Pope. Actually, I am opposed to the revelation of modern Catholicism quite violently. However, the boldness of this ignorant, lily-white redneck fundamentalist led my other students to form a committee to demand that I grade and return their accumulated essays and examinations. There was even a small demonstration outside the window of my office. It was rather dramatic. For being such simple, ignorant children, they managed it quite well. At the height of the demonstration, I dumped all of the old papers, ungraded of course, out of the window and right under the students' heads. The college was too small to accept this act of defiance against the abyss of contemporary academia. Ignatius, you never told me that. I did not want to excite you at the time. I also told the students that, for the sake of humanity's future, I hoped that they were all sterile. Ignatius arranged the pillows about his head. I could never have possibly read over the illiteracies and misconceptions burbling from the dark minds of those students. It will be the same wherever I work. You can get a good job. Wait till they see you a boy with a master's degree. Ignatius sighed heavily and said, I see no alternative. He twisted his face into a mask of suffering. There was no use fighting Fortuna until the cycle was over. You realize, of course, that this is all your fault. The progress of my work will be greatly delayed. I suggest that you go to your confessor and make some penance, Mother. Promise him that you will avoid the path of sin and drinking in the future. Tell him what the consequence of your moral failure has been. Let him know that you have delayed the completion of a monumental indictment against our society. Perhaps he will comprehend the magnitude of your failing. If he is my type of priest, the penance will no doubt be rather strict. However, I have learned to expect little from today's clergyman. I'm going to be good, Ignatius, you'll see. There. I shall find some employment, although it will not necessarily be what you would call a good job. I may have some valuable insights which may benefit my employer. Perhaps the experience can give my writing a new dimension. Being actively engaged in the system, which I criticize, will be an interesting irony in itself. Ignatius belched loudly. If only Myrna Minkoff could see how low I've fallen. What's that girl doing now? Mrs. Riley asked suspiciously. I put out good money for you to go to college, and you have to pick up with somebody like that? Myrna is still in New York, her native habitat. No doubt she is trying to taunt the police into arresting her in some demonstration at this very moment. She sure used to get me nervous playing on that guitar of hers all over this house. She's got money, like you said. Maybe you should have married her. You two might have settled down and had a nice baby or something. Do I believe that such obscenity and filth is coming from the lips of my own mother? Ignatius bellowed. Run along and fix me some dinner. I must be at the theater on time. It's a circus musical, a herald of excess, which I have been waiting to see for some time. We study the want-ads tomorrow. I'm so proud you're going to work at last, Mrs. Riley said emotionally and kissed her son somewhere in his damp mustache.